Hi, my name is Brian Pena. Today I'm going to be presenting the annotated bibliography for the Human Rights Campaign. I'm going to be talking about and analyzing the efforts and achievements of the Human Rights Campaign, being a human rights organization rooted in social justice. Here we have a picture of Steve Eden, who is the founder on the left, and we have the logo of the Human Rights Campaign right here, which means a lot in the they talk about it in the About page, which I'll get to right here. They have a section for the logo, which talks a lot about just basically how it officialized the HRC. The homepage, which is my first source, gets into basically the foundational values and principles of the Human Rights Campaign. And one of the very quotable phrases that they have here, transforming words into action, with transforming social justice into positive policy influence from the HRC, or words the institution stands by truly when they're basically funding these politicians and lobbying for these LGBT supporting policies. So it outlines important human rights campaign work to target these policies and to target policies which essentially stifle, the LGBT community. And the program aims to fund pro-fairness congressional candidates. However, it has now evolved into a more eclectic and expanded version, which basically supports the entire LGBTQ community and has worked to spread awareness and change the minds of many on the broad and persistent issue of, LGBT discrimination in public policy today. Over here, I have a picture of essentially a little pictographic thing for the values of the HRC. We have responsibility, the check mark, equity and intersectionality. We have learning and openness, boldness, resilience, heart, respect, community, and teamwork. These are values that the HRC stand by, and it may be cute, but it's also the foundational values that essentially make up this institution and let it stick to its moral principles. For my second source here, I have a biography by Vicky Eklor on Steve Eden, who, like I said, is the founder of the Human Rights Campaign. And this was found in the GLBTQ Archive. GLBTQarchive.com is a very, very great resource because it was founded essentially 22 years ago at this point, in 2000, at the rise of the internet, to essentially spread, an encyclopedia of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and queer culture and history, through this encyclopedic web archive. And they take authors from everywhere and basically have editors that revise and credit the work and make sure that it's true. They don't take everything, which is why the archive is so credited. So this biography in specific goes in depth to the founder's life, and it talks about how the founder feared for his sexuality when he was a child, because it stopped him from getting in the way of his dream of being a politician. So he essentially was at this roadblock where his identity was not good enough, or was essentially not right for the dream that he wanted to live, or the life that he wanted to live. And this created a lot of conflict, but he essentially broke through and created the HRC out of that because HRC its first responsibility was, like I said, to put these pro-fairness congressional candidates up to essentially have gay allies inside of the White House, inside of the Senate, and the Congress building. And this proved a lot more effective over the past 40 years within their achievements, and like I'll get into, have made great strides. Another thing that he talks about is that Steve wanted the Human Rights Organization to work and operate under a three-pronged plan, which essentially included lobbying, because he was a lobbyist, raising money for these funded politicians, because these politicians do need money in order to run. Like, they need money to survive just like anyone else. But these gay-friendly candidates, for the most part, didn't have any funding and didn't have any support. So the HRC did that. But the third most important part is grassroots pressure. Having people in a community on your side and voters on your side to vote for these candidates. And this was the most important part of the HRC, and this is why it ended up being so successful. All right, so over here we have the Equality magazine, and this is essentially an HRC funded magazine. I've pulled up the source from Kia Albritton, who is an author for the HRC Equality magazine, of course, and and she's talking about basically the stakes that for the upcoming midterm election, and how essentially voting for the wrong person can mean a lot for the LGBT community and which policies are going to be passed this upcoming policy season. So the article is essentially foreshadowing the midterms. The midterms have passed at this point that I'm covering this. But it's a good example of the content, basically, that HRC likes to put out. And a good example of how today, even contemporarily, they have grassroots supporters reading their articles and being sent these magazines. I get these magazines personally. And it's a really great article because it tells you exactly who are gay allies in support on this magazine. In terms of credibility, like I said, this is an article, and I feel that any article that it is essentially, I don't know exactly how these politicians are chosen, is what I'm saying. And I don't believe that every politician that's not chosen is not a LGBT ally. However, I do think that is a good outline for who you should vote for, because the HRC is a very reputable, LGBT organization, and they do aim to help. But it is very interesting. They go through all of the potential votes in the midterm. It aims to mobilize, essentially, its 62 million following, as it claims, of LGBTQ plus allies who have proven committed to using their voice to vote and fight against anti-equality legislation. 62 million is a lot of votes. I do say that. My fourth source is Stephen Dean's memoir, also co-written by Vicky Eklor. It's called Bringing Lesbian and Gay Rights into the Mainstream, which is essentially what HRC did. Steve's memoir is in-depth in its information formation of the HRC, along with his efforts on his own lobbying and his own efforts to start bringing voice of the cause, essentially, because HRC wasn't a thing once upon a time, 40 plus years ago. But in his memoir, though, he goes through, interestingly, the do's and don'ts of political activism, and in-depth information and details on how to lobby representatives, fundraise for your candidates and your cause, build grassroots support, and even some tidbits on protest activities and other things like that. He also reflects on, in his memoir, very interestingly, how he was welcomed to DC, where there was a gentleman who essentially, when he told him that he was lobbying for gay and lesbian rights, to leave back to Minnesota immediately, because there's nothing for you here, and that's an impossible and seemingly impossible, ruthless, it's a seemingly impossible task. So that was his welcoming to DC as a lobbyist, So the book does go very in depth into the struggles that he had, Stevie and Dean, and I do really like that it has an instructional portion, and it does count back the 20 years, because it was written in the 2000s, 2012, the 20 years of progress that he believes has gotten to in 2012, and I feel like we have had even more progress in the past decade, which is why I bring you to my fifth source, which is very, very recent. This is an address from Kamala Harris at the annual HRC dinner banquet, and Kamala Harris, this is on YouTube, Kamala Harris gets up and speaks. There was a lot of energy in the room. She's introduced very, very openly as an LGBT ally, and the fact that HRC, they intro with the fact that HRC is very, very happy that they have the most diverse candidacy ever, and that Kamala Harris and the people in the White House are basically on the LGBTQ community side in terms of policy. I'm very happy about that. And honestly, this is throughout all levels of government. Having LGBTQ officials and diversity in all levels of government is a very important thing, I believe. And having basically voices for minorities and people who do very, very much understand these communities because they are within them and have identities that differ from the layman. It's a very important thing when we're trying to talk about the policies that would very much affect those identities and people throughout America. Kamala says in her speech that HRC has shown what true patriotism is in America, and she's made sure to stress the importance of union and working together to reach our goals. As she spoke, that nothing that she does without hard work, well, not her, but many others as well. So it was a very touching address, and did have a very good message attached to it. And I do believe that this is a very optimistic and progress forward speech, and it very heartwarming that this was recent, and this is within our current administration. I expect to see a lot from this, hopefully. Our sixth source is from Megan Olson, excuse me, and it is an article from HRC News, from the website, and it's Books Not Bans, HRC Foundation's LGBTQ plus affirming book list for middle and high school. So uh, earlier this year in February, there were a lot of talk about the Don't Say Gay bill and talking about LGBTQ um, community and basically topics within class, within the education atmosphere. And there was consensus that, for a lot of these states, that there was no way, that we would have anything to do with LGBT talk in the school for whatever reason. Very homophobic. But this writer essentially solves the issue with her own article by providing a very, very long list of books that are from LGBT authors and feature LGBTQ within their characters and representation that you would not see within your own school public library. And it gives the option for many of these parents and many of these children to receive representation where they wouldn't, just because their school wouldn't let them, or it doesn't allow them, or because their community doesn't let them or allow them. And it's this narrative that gayness is inappropriate for children that is essentially the homophobia that is contemporarily, going on, like right now within the past year. There's still a lot of upward mobility to happen in terms of policy which mandates anti-discriminatory or no discrimination, or policies that can't discriminate, such as federal Supreme Court, policies that the Human Rights Policy, Equality Act, that needs to be passed in the Supreme Court. So, I use the source because I believe this is the type of forward thinking, that the HRC really does. And like I said, the grassroots movement is really what's most important here, and gaining basically that audience and that base off of high school and middle school students by introducing them books that they wouldn't be able to read otherwise, is basically, that good, no censorship that everybody loves to see, and that is the boldness and it adheres to basically the values that we talked about earlier. Okay, next slide. So another thing that the Human Rights Foundation or the Human Rights Campaign does is they have the humanrightsfoundation.org, and the Human Rights Foundation essentially has a lot more research-oriented articles and infographics that essentially provide statistics and very updated data and surveys that were taken by the HRC and were essentially peer-reviewed, and it's data that nobody else takes, nobody else does, and it's very important to basically advising and creating policy that creates or that affects these people, because we see a very consequential shift between policy and what goes on. So we have a lot of these talking about healthcare equality. The State Equality Index is another good research paper. The Epidemic of Violence Against Transgenders, Corporate Equality Index, Trans Lives and Positive Visibility, Welcoming Schools 2021 Annual Report. Black LGBTQ Discrimination is another good one. Corporate Equality Index 2021. All of these are sources that I may end up using one of these sources and taking from there, but I put all of these down just because this is a very good source pool to draw from in terms of the work that HRC is doing. And the research, the research to understand all these things, and like transgender, non-binary violence, and the creation of state equality, and black discrimination, and much more, are just invaluable in terms of making policies that affect them, is what I'm essentially trying to grasp here. And the Human Rights Foundation is funded to conduct this research, but through their through their donations, and a lot of grassroots membership is appreciated from them. They're on campus sometimes, and this is essentially why I chose them for this project, because I do believe that they do a lot for the LGBT community. So this has been my annotated bibliography. Thank you very much. Have a good one.